It's been 5 long years, but we finally got a sequel to the 2014 Godzilla movie, and this sequel hopes to rectify a lot of the complaints people had with the first film. Did it succeed, or did it just end up being worse? We're about to find out. Let the battle commence. The first thing that stood out to me about Godzilla's story is the way in which it's presented and paced. It's a movie full of scientific speeches and the military constantly talking about their next plan of attack, which is usually the most boring part of any monster movie, and that is no different here. Now, if it balanced itself out with more Godzilla action, much like what the original Japanese movies did, then I would give it some leeway, but unfortunately, it doesn't. So much of the plot revolves around long-winded military babble, and it also, strangely, revolves around the Mutos. And not only do they take the focus away from Godzilla, but they get so much screen time to the point that I was bored to tears every time they showed up. But thankfully, Godzilla King of the Monsters rectifies this, and the focus is very well balanced between Godzilla and the rest of the monsters. The first thing I immediately noticed about the story is that it was paced so much better than the 2014 Godzilla, it is unbelievable. Unlike the first film, there was never a time when I was looking at my watch, and even the stakes in this movie seemed much higher, and that made me all the more invested. Now yes, there is a ton of scientific exposition, some of which that doesn't even make sense, but the characters aren't just giving a bunch of technobabble throughout the movie, they are actually having proper conversations with each other. And this helps the pacing a great deal, as it gives the human elements of the story a bit more variety. Now let's talk about the tone of both films. Now something I really liked about the directing in the 2014 Godzilla is that the monsters were always being shown from angles that a normal person would usually see them. And although King of the Monsters does have some of those great angles, there aren't as much of them. Now, is it necessary? No, but it does add some uniqueness to the overall direction of these monster movies. But King of the Monsters does make up for this by adding color to the shots. All the shots in the 2014 Godzilla are full of dark colors, mostly browns, grays, and blacks. And not only does that make the movie look dull, but it also makes it hard to make out. There are times where you can't even see what is going on, and you really have to squint to even get an idea as to what is happening. Now, some people are going to say that the reason for this is that the movie is trying to be realistic. Well, you can make it look realistic, but you should still be able to see what is going on. What fun is there in watching a movie when you're struggling to see it? And this overly dark aesthetic makes its way into the movie's feel and tone. With regards to which of these two Godzilla movies is superior, it all really comes down to pacing, and the 2014 Godzilla is widely criticized for this, and I am going to take that criticism a step further. The 1998 Godzilla movie is an abomination. It resembles nothing of Godzilla, but even that movie had a better idea as to how you should pace a Godzilla movie. It gives enough time to the humans and then enough time to the monsters. And if I am comparing an actual Godzilla movie to a movie that bears no resemblance to Godzilla, then that means this movie really failed here. It took one part of a Godzilla movie, which is the military, and used that as its primary means of conveying the story. And that's all I really come away remembering about the movie, a bunch of scenes with the military. King of the Monsters, however, actually paces itself like a good monster movie, and as a direct result, I found myself more invested in the story and was always interested to see what was going to happen next. And you know what? Something that both of these movies do is they treat Godzilla as a more serious movie, and I really appreciate that. That being said, the movie with the superior story is King of the Monsters. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you are in the cinema watching this movie. You pay the extra ticket price to see this on the largest screen your cinema has, and then after you wait a whole hour for the first fight scene to show up, you are so excited. And just when you think you are finally going to see two monsters fight, we cut to a small clip of the fight on a little television screen. I just don't understand. The filmmakers know what people want to see from a Godzilla film. They know why we pay IMAX ticket prices to see a movie like this in the cinema, so why would they go from a big epic scale like this to a Teletubbies TV screen like this? For those of you out there who don't mind about this, and there are a lot of you, can you at least understand where I'm coming from? I remember when I first saw this in the cinema, I couldn't even get mad. I was just so shocked and confused by what had just happened. I know this isn't the case, but it honestly feels like Godzilla was hardly in the movie because they couldn't afford to keep the camera on him for more than a few seconds at a time. And that was very distracting to me whenever Godzilla showed up. Now, is there anything I liked about Godzilla's appearance in this movie? Well, yeah, there is. Although he is a little wide and doesn't have much teeth, I really liked his design. The film also does something which is quite interesting. There is one very short scene where it gives him a small semblance of a soul, and I almost felt sorry for him in that moment. It's by no means on the same level of Peter Jackson's King Kong, but it was still very good. And the final action scene had some truly great moments, but we'll talk more about that in the action segment of this video. And as I mentioned earlier, the movie does a great job of showing Godzilla from the human's perspective, and that is down to the amazing cinematography. But that is not enough to keep me interested, because even though the 2014 Godzilla did a great job, it's not the first Godzilla film to give me this type of movie-going experience. That, again, and I hate to keep saying this, is the 98 Godzilla. The first time I ever saw a monster from the human's perspective was in his introduction scene where they were trying to conceal him from us, the audience. And this scene itself was actually very suspenseful at the time. But yeah, Godzilla has his moments, but there wasn't enough of him. In King of the Monsters, however, Godzilla is given much more screen time. First off, you are actually able to see him a lot clearer, as the movie doesn't conceal him in darkness most of the time like the first movie did, and as a direct result, the special effects team were able to make Godzilla a lot more expressive with his facial features this time round. And I was surprised to find that I actually felt for Godzilla a lot more in this one, especially when he was getting his butt kicked. And whereas in the 2014 Godzilla I was kind of not into him being the hero, I actually really enjoyed seeing him as the hero in the second movie, especially when the army help him out and charge into battle with him. This was a really cool scene, and it was absolutely beautiful to look at. And giving Godzilla the increased amount of screen time really was a key component that made his scenes a lot better. And he had a lot of scenes in this film. In the 2014 Godzilla, he only really has 2 scenes in the whole movie. The scene on the bridge, and the cut-up action scene in the climax. The rest of his tiny appearances just consist of a couple seconds of build-up, and his back. And do you want to know Godzilla's total screen time in this movie? The movie itself is 2 hours and 3 minutes, and Godzilla has about 11 minutes of screen time, and that includes the shots of his back, and that really pissed me off. I have listened to a lot of people's defenses for this, and I still believe that this movie made absolutely poor use of his screen time. And let me prove this to you with an example. Darth Vader. He is a very well-known character and an iconic villain, and I thought the amount of screen time he had in the original trilogy was absolutely perfect. And do you know how much screen time he had in the original films? Well, A New Hope is just over 2 hours, very much like the 2014 Godzilla, and Darth Vader only had 9 minutes and 15 seconds of screen time. Yep, do you see what I'm getting at? Well, let me give you another example just to make sure. The Empire Strikes Back is 2 hours and 4 minutes. This is arguably the movie that made Darth Vader the renowned villain he is today because of the sheer amount of stuff he does. And how much screen time did he have? 13 minutes and 15 seconds. And for those wondering, his screen time in Return of the Jedi was 14 minutes and 45 seconds. So this is my point with the 2014 Godzilla movie. Godzilla has more screen time than Darth Vader did in A New Hope, but somehow it feels like he has a lot less. And after the Darth Vader examples I gave you, there is no excuse for that. Bottom line, director Gareth Edwards made very poor use of Godzilla. Now, his screen time in King of the Monsters wasn't perfect, but I was more than happy with it because it did make very good use of his time. And when the movie was over, I actually got to see Godzilla do everything I wanted him to. So the movie with the vastly superior use of Godzilla is King of the Monsters. Okay, I don't want to spend too much time on this segment, but this needs to be addressed with any monster movie. So let's start with the characters in the first film. And I gotta say, it's kind of annoying that they got such great actors, because they didn't even take advantage of them. The 2 actors that make use of their acting talents is Bryan Cranston and Elizabeth Olsen. These 2 play it sad throughout most of their scenes in the movie, and they both convey their emotions very well. Unfortunately, all the other characters don't. Ken Watanabe, for example, all he does throughout this movie is act like he's listening intensely and spews out a bunch of trailer talk. All the military are just faceless characters that you don't care about and constantly dish out tons of exposition. And the biggest crime of all, they have Aaron Taylor Johnson as the lead role, and he is the most boring character out of the whole movie. His problem is that he never emotes, even when his dad dies. Now Johnson has a lot of range as an actor. I mean, he played the dumbass Kick-Ass for crying out loud, so I know he can act. So why the director made him play this boring and emotionless character who doesn't even react when seeing a freaking monster really baffles me. This director is known for making his characters very dull, and that is 100% on display right here. Even some of the other human characters that should be bloody horrified act like they're looking at nothing. This little girl in particular, I honestly don't know what kind of direction she was given, because to me, it looks like they didn't tell her anything. Seriously, the acting in this movie from pretty much everyone is incredibly stilted. Now another defense this movie gets is that it's not a movie about the monsters, it's a movie about the people. But the thing is, the people are boring and you don't care about any of them. I genuinely cared for Bryan Cranston's character and the investigation that he was doing, but as soon as he got taken out of the movie, so did I. Because I had no one else to emotionally attach myself to. As for the characters in King of the Monsters, the dialogue starts out good between the mother and daughter, but it very quickly turns into poorly written dialogue. Now the actors are doing the best they can with it, as I have seen the two deliver dialogue so well in other projects, but you can tell even they couldn't do much with this script. But I was able to sit through it simply because these actors are at least able to emote like normal human beings rather than being emotionless statues like all the characters from the first film. Additionally, the actors do a very good job with their performances that for the sake of the movie, I just accepted the nonsensical science and mediocre dialogue. The second movie also has, in my opinion, a better cast. You got Millie Bobby Brown from Stranger Things and Vera Farmiga, who is from the Conjuring movies. And earlier this year, I saw her in the Psycho series Bates Motel, and it was in Bates Motel where I really saw her shine as an actress. And she brings a lot of her emotional acting from that show into her performance in this movie, and it was very effective. Even returning characters like Ken Watanabe was not as obnoxious as he was in the first film. Now he wasn't a great character or anything, but he was a big improvement over the first film. And he's not just giving intense stares throughout the whole movie. And the emotional conflicts that the family went through was really nice to see. Now it wasn't high-class drama or anything, but it was a higher level of drama that I didn't expect to see in a Godzilla film. Now I don't want to spoil anything, but the ways and reasons as to why some of the monsters get loose I thought was very poorly written. There was an interesting idea there, but the logic for releasing these monsters is so flawed and it makes no sense. And then they try to make that character seem sympathetic, and I don't think that was right. I'll admit, I initially was feeling sorry for them, but when you think about it, no, this character was way out of line. Now, Millie Bobby Brown did a good job with the material she was given, but to be honest, if it wasn't for the fact that we know she's in Stranger Things, then her character and performance would go completely unnoticed. Nothing about her performance here is really noticeable that it elevates her to new heights of acting, but she did a good enough job for the role she was given. But she essentially just plays the young girl in a Godzilla movie, and to an extent, that's what all the characters in this movie play, just characters in a Godzilla movie. That being said, the three actors that play the family become very likable during the climax battle of the movie, and I did care for them at this point. The only character I didn't like was the father, played by Bruce Baxter from King Kong. Somehow, everything he says is always the right call. He's not an expert with these types of monsters or anything, but the movie just treats him like the all-seeing and all-knowing for some reason. And I also don't like the character that much because the way he was introduced reminds me a lot of the way Nick Tatopoulos was introduced from the crappy 1998 film. I'm not gonna knock any points off of the movie for that, but it's just something I noticed. So the problems are here, and I fully acknowledge them. But thankfully, the movie's great use of pacing kicked in, and it went right back to giving me the stuff that I have wanted from a Godzilla movie. And surprisingly, the problems didn't have a strong impact on me. Now if these issues were more in your face, then yes, they would be a problem. But they are so sidelined when compared to everything else in the movie that when it was all said and done, it didn't really bother me. And like I said, by the time we approached the movie's climax, I really had a liking to the family, and I actually cared for them. I cared for none of the characters in the 2014 Godzilla, however, and the only one I did care for got killed off very early on. So the Godzilla movie with the superior characters is King of the Monsters. Now, being a Godzilla movie, there are obviously going to be monsters that Godzilla has to face off against. And in the 2014 movie, we have a couple of monsters called the Mutos. And I like the idea that the Mutos are able to let out EMPs. That led to some genuinely creative scenes, and I especially liked the scene where it uses an EMP, and as well as the city losing its power, even the military jets start to crash land into the ocean. That was cool. And I liked the scene where the Muto unexpectedly shows up behind our military characters. That provided some good tension. Other than that though, I really hated the Mutos. If you look at Japanese movies and TV shows, you will see that the Japanese are very creative when it comes to designing monsters. Lots of their franchises are full of them, such as Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon, but whenever American filmmakers try to create monsters, they are just incredibly generic. And in the 2014 Godzilla's case, it just recycles the Cloverfield monster's design with a small amount of alterations to make it seem different, but the template of the monster is exactly the same, even down to its body shape. This movie should have been really called Godzilla vs. the Cloverfield Monster. Only once. At the end of the movie. Okay, we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Bottom line, these monsters are so boring and uncreative, and when you take into account the plethora of Godzilla monsters they could have pulled from, this is a real letdown. But in Godzilla King of the Monsters, it does make use of the incredibly creative and classic monsters that the Godzilla franchise is known for. It uses Rodan, Mothra, and of course, King Ghidorah. And these monsters were so awesome. I even thought the new designs were so well done. They even made better use of Mothra. Now maybe it's just the Godzilla movies that I have seen, but Mothra has always been treated as a joke. Her wings are such big targets that as soon as they get hit, she's down. But they really treated her so much better in this movie, better than any other Godzilla movie ever has. And going back to King Ghidorah, I loved the way they introduced this thing, and the way they describe him and what kind of unique monster he is. I actually thought it was chilling, and I actually feared for Godzilla and even some of the characters. And another great new addition to Ghidorah is that it is actually intelligent. All three of the heads have their own individual personalities, to the point that two of them start fighting a little, and the third head essentially tells them to knock it off. And there were other times where the individual heads were doing stuff amidst all the chaos that you didn't even notice. And that gives the movie some additional rewatch value should you decide to watch it again. And there are a lot of callbacks to the original Godzilla films, especially with some of the action scenes. Now I can talk about the monsters all day and let my inner child loose, but I won't. Bottom line, the Mutos in the first Godzilla had a couple of good scenes, and the EMPs that they used I thought was neat, but as far as I was concerned, they were just your typical, generic, and uninspired Hollywood monsters. Godzilla 2, however, gives us what we should have gotten from the very beginning. It gave us the classic and iconic monsters, and they were utilized so well. So the movie with the far superior monsters is Godzilla King of the Monsters. Now the first movie has a couple of scenes with the military going up against the Mutos, and these were decent, but the main action scenes we have come to see are with Godzilla, and he has only 2 action scenes, and the first one I thought was very out of place, that being the scene where Godzilla suddenly decides to get out of the ocean right in front of the only bridge for miles, and I honestly don't know why he did this. He could have just easily swam under the bridge, but he decided to do this instead. I mean, I have no problem with him getting out of the ocean, but why did he get out right here of all places?
Way to go, Lummox! The only rock for miles, and you had to hit it!
It just felt like a forced action scene. It almost felt like the filmmakers had realized that they were an hour and a half into the movie and they hadn't given us a single action scene with Godzilla, so they just forced one in and gave us this. And honestly, if they just gave us that fight with the Muto earlier, then I would have been fine not seeing Godzilla until a little later. But they didn't do that, and instead decided to force an action scene even though they had 2 perfectly set up both here and here. I honestly don't understand what their thinking was behind this. The way in which they pace out and use Godzilla is just ridiculous and not planned out. And then we get the final battle, and they make you wait so long for it that by the time it actually happens, it's cool, but it doesn't feel worth it. Especially when you take into account that they keep on cutting back to the soldiers that have already been hogging the film's entire runtime. And even when the fight was happening, at this point, I just felt absolutely drained and exhausted by all the teasing that I felt like I was not rewarded enough for all the patience I had been giving this film. Now if the movie was about a half hour shorter, then yes, this fight would have been worth the wait. But the fact that I had to wait as long as I did, by the time the fight came around, I had completely zoned out at this point. As for stuff I liked about the fight, well, the camera angles again were very well placed, the way the movie builds up Godzilla's atomic breath was very well done, and the way Godzilla killed the first monster I thought was pretty underwhelming, but the way he killed the second one was pure genius, and it was so awesome. But that's about it. I wish I could name more great things about the action scenes, but I really can't. They're small in numbers, pretty dark and uninteresting to look at, and they always cut back to the human characters so often that you aren't even able to properly enjoy the fight. And do you know what the sad thing is? The best way to watch this fight is not by watching it in the movie, but by watching it on YouTube, where the video will most likely cut out all the scenes involving the military and focus purely on the battle with the monsters. That's the best way to enjoy this fight in all its glory, not by watching the movie, which is quite depressing. So, what did I think of the action in Godzilla 2? Well, the first thing I noticed is that there are way more action scenes than the first movie. Godzilla gets to fight pretty much every monster in this film, and he even gets to team up with one. Not to mention that the other monsters in this movie also get to fight each other. They don't just fight Godzilla, and that was a really nice surprise to me. Now, there are times where King of the Monsters pans the camera away from the fight to the humans, and I really wish they would just cut that shit out. But thankfully, it's not done as often as the 2014 movie, and even when it does happen, there are points where you can see the characters and the fight at the same time. And I was fully invested in the fights throughout this movie, with each one getting better than the last. And never once did it tease a fight and then show it on the TV or cut away to the aftermath or any nonsense like that. They also added an interesting element to the final fight. There's this device in the movie called the Orca, and I loved the way they incorporated this thing and the effects it has on the monsters. And that final battle scene in the film's climax was so awesome. And the human characters, one in particular, actually helps Godzilla out, and you realize that if they didn't, Godzilla actually could have lost. Now, did I have any problems with the fights in Godzilla 2? Well, there was one other problem. Whereas the first film was too dark, this one at times is too bright. But the lights calm down after a second or two, and then you can see everything again. And when you do, you are really able to admire how downright beautiful this movie is. So the action in Godzilla 2 is everything I wanted the action in the first Godzilla to be. And when the movie was over, I actually wanted to watch several of the action scenes again. And a big part of why I enjoyed them so much is because we didn't have to wait nearly 2 hours to get our first monster battle. We got the first one fairly early on, and then the rest kept on coming at a comfortable pace. So the movie with the vastly superior action is King of the Monsters. Let me tell ya, rewatching Godzilla for this video really felt like work. And when I finished watching it, my opinions didn't change. The movie just drags so much, I honestly feel like I deserve a medal for being able to stay awake. And funnily enough, when I watched this movie again to prepare for this video, I didn't even realize I was doing it, but I was actually watching it with the mindset that it was not a Godzilla movie, because I knew that Godzilla was hardly going to show up, and I was going to be spending most of my time with a couple of crappy monsters and some boring characters. I will say this in the movie's defense: the build-up for Godzilla is amazing. I would give all of his build-up scenes a 10 out of 10 easily. But build-up really is nothing without an equally great payoff. And this film either shows the payoff on the news, skips it altogether, or constantly interrupts it. And what's left is a ton of military speeches, the army following the monster, and when the action does happen, it's too little too late. Godzilla King of the Monsters, on the other hand, gave me exactly what I wanted from the first movie. My requirements for a Godzilla movie are simple. First, give me Godzilla. You're not going to do that? Okay, then at least give me passable characters. Oh, you're not going to do that either? Okay, then what the hell am I supposed to be watching, and why the hell am I supposed to care? King of the Monsters actually gives me Godzilla, and then it gave me passable characters. It's time for the scores. If you don't look at the 2014 Godzilla as a Godzilla movie, then it gets a 3 or a 4 out of 10. But when you take into account that it is a Godzilla movie, it is unbelievably disappointing. And as a result, it gets a 2 out of 10. And Godzilla King of the Monsters, I was originally going to give it a 7, but the more I reflected on it, the more I liked it. And that's why my final score for King of the Monsters is an 8 out of 10. It's been 5 long years since I came out of that first movie, and I left very disappointed. But this movie has remedied my long-time disdain, and I came out of the cinema with a big smile on my face. And whereas I didn't want to watch the 2014 version ever again, I actually wanted to rewatch King of the Monsters. Even talking about the movie now, I want to see it again. And let me make this clear, I was never a fan of Godzilla. I liked it, but I never loved it, and I certainly wasn't a fan. But King of the Monsters has changed that, and now I am a big fan of Godzilla. This movie has given me everything I wanted but didn't get from the 2014 Godzilla, and I am so grateful for that. And much like Aquaman, this is another one of those movies that I am not going to watch on my TV. I am only going to see it on a projector. Now I know some of you are going to ask, so I'll just say it now. No, I don't think this movie is visually as stunning as Aquaman was, but on its own merits, it's something that you should watch on a projector so you can really take in the scope and scale of these monsters. And you won't get that on a normal television screen. And the soundtrack for both movies was also great. The 2014 film has a very nice and eerie soundtrack, but I personally think that King of the Monsters has the superior soundtrack, because not only does it make use of the original Godzilla theme, but it also modernizes it, making it the best version of the classic Godzilla theme that I have ever heard. It even modernizes the original Mothra theme, and in general, the film makes fantastic use of its soundtrack. And by the end of the movie, as cheesy as it sounds, I was like, yeah, Godzilla truly is the king of the monsters. So that's it for another Versus video. If you liked it, please do click that thumbs up button, as it really helps in getting my videos recommended on YouTube's weird algorithm. And also, feel free to donate $1 to me on Patreon, so if anything unfortunate happens to my channel, you can all still watch my future Versus videos and stay up to date with my content. Thank you so much as always for watching, guys. Not a day goes by where I don't appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing all of you next time. Take care.